When Magic the Gathering first released, individual cards more or less had nothing to do with one another. Cards were connected broadly. They shared colors or types, or had effects that cared about cards of colors or types. Flavor texts and names gave the sensation that these cards shared a setting, the world of Dominaria, but no one card needed another by name to work. And it didn't take long for this to change. As early as the Antiquities expansion, Wizards of the Coast was experimenting with cards that cared about other specific cards. The Urza lands are a trio of land cards that, individually, only tap for a single colorless mana. However, if you assemble Urza's Tower, Urza's Mine, and Urza's Factory on board all together, the resulting combination is greater than the sum of its parts, and the lands generate a collective 7 colorless mana. Combining together to get this powerful effect has earned these 3 lands the nickname of Urzatron, a reference to the Voltron animated cartoon. The Urzatron lands would see several reprints throughout the years, and good thing too, since they've proven time and time again to be popular across several formats. The Urza lands represent well their namesake's fixation on efficiency. Urza was an artificer who believed a system could be optimized far greater than its component parts, and these lands reflect that belief well by extracting more mana together than they could on their own. These cards are extremely flavorful, and not just because they represent the lore well. No, their flavor comes from their connection to the lore and to one another, as game pieces united in both form and function. Though there isn't, to my knowledge, an official term for groups of cards like this, I personally like to refer to them as exactly that, groups. While Wizards of the Coast would never again release a group of lands, thanks to how powerful the Urza lands ended up being, they would, over time, release plenty of other card groups of varying power and flavor. The 1996 set Mirage saw the release of an incredibly powerful legendary creature known as the Spirit of the Night. This demon spirit had an impressive 6 power and 5 toughness, as well as a formidable set of abilities: haste, flying, trample, protection from black, and first strike as long as it was attacking. In the lore, the Spirit of the Night is a terrible demon that can only be called forth by the Breath Stealers Guild, a group of assassins hailing from Urborg. This monster seems to transcend life itself and appears to be nearly unstoppable. During the events of the Mirage War, this creature appeared and slew the Council of Voices, the leading body of the nation of Femeref. It's only appropriate that this nightmarish creature had such imposing stats. The only downside to this monster was its high casting cost, 9 mana in total. Fortunately, there was an easier way to get the Spirit of the Night onto the board. Breath Stealer, Feral Shadow, and Urborg Panther were a group of 3 3-cost black creatures released alongside Spirit of the Night, and the effect of Urborg Panther allowed you to sacrifice all 3 to put Spirit of the Night directly into play from your library. Getting 3 relatively low-cost creatures onto the board is obviously much easier than hard-casting a 9-cost legend, and this group is made even better with the fact that Urborg Panther's effect can be done at any time, letting you drop the Spirit of the Night whenever you please. Personally, my only issue with this group is that, in the lore, it's the Breath Stealers that summon the Spirit of the Night, not some random panther, meaning that this whole effect is one massive flavor fail. The very next set in the Mirage block, Visions, would give us another similar group. Kisku Drake and Spitting Drake were both 4-cost 2/2 drakes with flying and a color-appropriate version of fire breathing. Kisku Drake let you pay 1 green mana a turn to give it an extra toughness, and Spitting Drake let you pay 1 red mana a turn to give it an extra power. While these drakes aren't exactly impressive, the Kisku Drake has an extra ability that allows you to sacrifice both of these creatures to play a Via Shivan Dragon directly from your library, just like with Spirit of the Night. Via Shivan Dragon is a hefty lizard. This dragon has 4 power and toughness, but also costs 6 mana in total. It's got flying and an improved version of each of the Drake's abilities, allowing you to use either as often as you want. While sacrificing 2 4-drop creatures to get a free 6 cost isn't as impressive as using 3 3-drops to get a 9 cost, this group was still interesting for allowing you to get a bigger creature directly from your deck, one that was, mechanically, superior to both of the sacrificed creatures combined. This ability, summoning a named card by fulfilling certain conditions, would be refined and reused over the years. Legions, for instance, gave us Dark Supplicant, which only needed to sacrifice 3 clerics to summon the Scion of Darkness, and Shards of Alara gave us the Herald Cycle, each of which could sacrifice 3 creatures of their respective shards' colors to summon a powerful creature right from the deck. Visions also gave us the red djinn known as Kukus. This 5-cost 3/5 djinn has trample and fire breathing, but it also has a negative ability. If you don't control a creature called Keeper of Kukus during your upkeep, Kukus will burn you for 3 damage and will be forced to attack. Flavorfully, this occurs because Kukus is an irate old djinn and is prone to going on a rampage if not kept in check by another creature. Mechanically, WotC probably just felt that Kukus had the potential to be too strong on his own and needed a small drawback to keep him from being too oppressive. Something to note about these 3 groups from the Mirage block is that the big focus monster for each group is on the reserved list, which I'm sure is not a coincidence. A few years later, the 1999 set Portal 3 Kingdoms has within Liu Bei, Lord of Shu. This legendary human soldier is a 2/4 that costs 5 mana total. Liu Bei has horsemanship, but he also has an ability that gives him 2 more power and toughness if you have either Guan Yu, Sainted Warrior, or Zhang Fei, Fierce Warrior, in play. This is an example of a group that doesn't require all of its cards present to get the specific bonus. In 2003's Mirrodin block, we follow the story of Glissa and her struggle against Memnarch. During her journey, the elf would assemble 3 mighty artifacts that, when brought together, formed the powerful Kaldra Avatar. The Sword of Kaldra, released in the Mirrodin set, is a legendary equipment that gives its equipped creature +5/+5, and whenever the equipped creature damages another creature, that creature is removed from the game. The following set, Dark Steel, saw the release of the Shield of Kaldra, a legendary equipment that gives the equipped creature indestructible, but also makes the Sword of Kaldra, Shield of Kaldra, and the Helm of Kaldra indestructible. The helm itself would see print in the final set of the block, 5th Dawn, and it gives an equipped creature First Strike, Trample, and Haste. However, it had another ability. By paying 1 mana while you controlled all 3 Kaldra artifacts, the Helm of Kaldra would create a 4/4 legendary avatar named Kaldra and then equipped all of the Kaldra artifacts to it. Of all the examples in this video, I have to confess that the Cauldron artifacts are by far my favorite. Assembling several different cards on board to summon one large, virtually unbeatable monster is just really cool and isn't really something Wizards has been able to replicate with other mechanics. Look at Mutate, for instance. This mechanic is designed to emulate a monster growing more powerful and bizarre as it undergoes transformations. And while I can kind of see where WotC is coming from, in practice, it really just feels like you're stapling a bunch of unrelated creatures together into one card. Yes, Mutate is without a doubt more powerful on account of its versatility, but it overall feels very much like a flavor fail. With Cauldron, meanwhile, it's more like you're assembling a puzzle, one that belongs together and feels naturally united. The difference between summoning Cauldron and just having a big Mutate stack is, flavorfully, night and day. In the Magic 2012 set, we received another group of artifacts in Crown of Empires, Scepter of Empires, and Throne of Empires. Each of these artifacts, much like the Urza lands, has an effect that becomes better if you control all three. Crown of Empires lets you pay 3 mana and tap it to tap a target creature. But if you controlled the Scepter and the Throne, you gain control of that creature instead. Scepter of Empires lets you tap it to deal 1 damage to a player, but if you control the Crown and the Throne, it deals 3 damage instead. And finally, Throne of Empires lets you pay 1 mana and tap it to create a 1/1 white soldier creature token. But if you controlled, you guessed it, the Crown and the Scepter, you create 5 of these tokens instead. The flavor text of these cards and their combined effects could not be more clear. These cards are meant to emulate what it feels like to be the ruler of an empire. With your royal authority, you can summon up an army, deal harsh damage to foes, or even convert enemies over to your banner. While the later Monarch mechanic would be more powerful, these 3 cards are, together, more flavorful in how they evoke the image of a ruler. And while I may prefer the Cauldron artifacts overall, the Empire's artifacts, like the Urza lands, represents the ideal version of this mechanic. Separate cards, each with a relatively minor effect, that become much better when they're all brought together. In Magic 2014, we got another group, this one centered on the Bogbrew Witch. This creature has an effect that lets you pay 2 mana and tap it to search your library for a Festering Newt or a Bubbling Cauldron and put them directly into play. Festering Newt is a salamander with 1 power and toughness, and when it dies, it gives an opponent's creature -1/-1 until the end of turn. However, if you control the Bogbrew Witch when this effect resolves, that creature gets -4/-4 instead. Bubbling Cauldron, meanwhile, is an artifact that lets you pay 1 mana, tap it, and sacrifice a creature to gain life. Alternatively, you could pay 1, tap it, and sacrifice the Festering Newt specifically to cause each opponent to lose 4 life, while you gain life equal to the amount of life lost this way. Throughout history, witches have been portrayed as these dark and murky individuals, living alone in huts and brewing curses and potions in their dark cauldrons. Bogbrew Witch and her associated cards depict this iconic witch very well, and while these cards aren't very strong individually, the witch's ability to search out her associated cards without restriction probably made them pretty good in sealed events. I, sadly, wouldn't know since I wasn't playing back then. I was, however, playing the game by 2015, and in the cons block we get the card Renowned Weaponsmith, a 1/3 human artificer that costs 2 mana. The Weaponsmith can tap to give you 2 mana, though you can only use this mana to cast artifact spells or use artifact abilities. Alternatively, you could pay a blue and tap the Weaponsmith to search your library for either the Heartpiercer Bow or the Vial of Dragonfire and add them to your hand. Neither of these cards are particularly impressive, sadly. Heartpiercer Bow is an equipment that deals 1 damage to a defending player's creature whenever the equipped creature attacks, while the Vial of Dragonfire is a bomb that lets you pay 2 mana, tap, and sacrifice it to deal 2 damage to a single creature. Neither of these cards care about one another or the Weaponsmith himself, so together they barely qualify as a group, but they do highlight the flavor of the cons block. Each of these cards is from a different set. Heartpiercer Bow is from Khans of Tarkir, Renowned Weaponsmith is from Fate Reforged, and Vial of Dragonfire is from Dragons of Tarkir. The cons block is designed a bit differently from other blocks in terms of draft experience. Each of the big sets, Khans and Dragons, are intended to be drafted alongside Fate Reforged, but not one another. The Renowned Weaponsmith being in Fate Reforged, and his artifacts each being in only one of the other sets, made it feel like, depending on which timeline you chose, only one of his creations could survive, and that's a flavor detail you can't really experience aside from drafting it as intended. In 2021, we saw the release of the first Universes Beyond standard set, The Adventures in the Forgotten Realms. Here we have the Book of Vile Darkness, the Hand of Vecna, and the Eye of Vecna. When Vecna's Eye comes into play, you draw a card and lose 2 life. Also, during your upkeep, you can pay 2 mana to draw a card and lose 2 life. Vecna's Hand is an equipment with an equip cost of 2, but you could alternatively pay 1 life for each card in your hand to equip it. Neat. At the beginning of combat on your turn, the hand gives its equipped creature, or a creature you control named Vecna, extra power and toughness equal to the number of cards in your hand. The Book of Vile Darkness is an artifact that creates a 2/2 zombie during your end step, provided you lost at least 2 life that turn. You could also tap it, exiling itself, and Vecna's Hand and Eye to create Vecna himself, an 8/8 zombie god with Indestructible that also gains all the triggered abilities of the 3 cards exiled for the effect. While I won't be going over the flavor of Vecna, since the character has definitely changed since I last cared about Dungeons & Dragons lore, I will say that I find these cards to be mechanically delightful. Like the Kaldra artifacts, you're creating one big monster by assembling several cards. Though, unlike with Kaldra, the pieces themselves don't remain on board, so if Vecna is removed somehow, you aren't getting him back. Later that same year saw the release of Innistrad, Crimson Vow, and the equipment Bride's Gown and Groom's Finery. Bride's Gown gives its equipped creature +2/+0, and an additional +0/+2 and first strike as long as a creature you control is equipped with Groom's Finery. Likewise, Groom's Finery gives its equipped creature +2/+0 and an additional +0/+2 and Death Touch if a creature you control is equipped with Bride's Gown. Crimson Vow may be one of the worst sets to be released in terms of mechanics and story, but these two cards at least show us that Wizards is still capable of putting delicious flavor into otherwise lackluster sets. Finally, we come to 2022's Brothers War set. Here we have a trio of artifact creatures that serves as a callback to the group that started it all, the Urza lands. Mine Worker, Tower Worker, and Power Plant Worker are all Assembly Worker artifact creatures with effects that improve drastically if you have all three on board. Mine Worker taps to gain 1 life, but 3 life if you have the other 2 workers. Tower Worker has reach and can tap to generate a colorless mana, 3 colorless mana if you control the other 2 workers. And Power Plant Worker lets you pay 3 mana once a turn to give it +2/+2 until the end of turn. But if you control the other 2 workers, it gets 2 +1/+1 counters instead, which is much more impactful. These 3 robots are a delightful little callback to the original land group, and I was positively ecstatic when I first saw them. They're also, like the Urza lands, legal in Pauper, so you can bet I'm trying to brew a deck that makes use of them somehow. I don't think it'll be very good, but it's definitely something I want to do. Over the years, Wizards has released several cards that care about one another, and I know I didn't cover all of them here, but I wanted to talk about some of the most memorable group examples. With the exception of the Urza lands, none of these groups have really seen a lot of play outside of their native sealed and draft environments. While some of these are indeed pretty powerful, the resources you have to assemble on board are sometimes just not worth it, especially when Magic has so many other cards that can just casually combo together for an advantage. The game has so many 2-card combos that can really put you ahead. Dedicating 3 or more slots of your deck to what is often just a really strong creature is rarely worth it, especially when you take removal and other pieces of interaction into account. Now, that's not to say these cards have no home. EDH, for instance, is a format that loves cards like these, with several decks dedicated to summoning Kaldra, for instance. And of course, as I've said before, the Urza lands themselves are extremely powerful, thanks in part to them being lands. Lands are just easier to put into a given deck, they're harder for opponents to deal with, and let's face it, the potential to have access to 7 mana by as early as turn 3 is really good incentive to include them. Despite their overall drawbacks, I still absolutely love groups, thanks in part to the way they feel overall. Bringing several cards together that belong together is just a really flavorful way to play the game, and I do genuinely hope we see more of these as time goes on. Now then, thank you so very much for watching this video. As always, please do all the things that appease the YouTube algorithm, and that will help the channel grow. If you want to support me directly, there is a link to my Patreon page below. I know that this is a rather odd topic for a video, but it's one that I kind of just felt like doing. Lately, I've been in a bit of a creative slump, thanks in part to both general content creator burnout and a tipping point in my anger over WotC's recent behavior. I had to take a step back and just take a good, hard look at what I liked about the game, and this mechanic, these groups, they were one of the things I really liked, really just wanted to talk about. I wasn't going to release any more scripted videos for 2022. I was actually planning on taking a break, starting fresh again in the new year. But taking a hard look at these cards reignited my passion something fierce, and this video was created as a result. If you've made it this far, then, well, thank you. Most viewers never get to the end of a video, so consider yourself part of the 1%. I'm not sure what I'm going to be working on next. Thanks to viewer suggestions, I have a laundry list of video topics to cover, but I also want to do more videos like this, passion projects that help remind me why I love this game so much. I'm probably done covering new lore on the channel for now. WotC, after all, has made it clear they don't care about it, so why should I? I'll instead focus hard on what I enjoy most about this game, the flavor, the lore, and I'll try to share these topics with all of you. Hopefully, in turn, you'll enjoy them. One final time, thank you so much for watching and have a great day. I'll see you in the next video.